Let me now rope in Shiv Arur as well, my colleague and managing editor of NDTV on the broadcast. Now, Shiv, this is likely to now not only just hijack all legislative agenda, this also takes the entire discourse into a completely different direction. That's what the Congress party is attempting to do here.
Well, the unpublished memoir of former Army Chief General Manoj Mukund Naravane, has been weaponized now by Rahul Gandhi, leader of the opposition. Justifiably so, because, that book was supposed to come out in 2024. It has, gotten stuck. It has been a topic of a great deal of rumor and buzz over why it is unpublished. Our sources tell us there are lots of sensitivities in the book which cannot be put out because India and China currently are still involved in a border standoff across the line of actual control. Also, there are sources who point to how, for an army chief to write a memoir so quickly after service, especially on operational matters, is extremely odd. It's not something that usually happens. So many people have questioned why such a memoir was even necessary and why, a former army chief has chosen to talk about operationally sensitive matters while that particular operation is still very much on. Remember, the standoff in eastern Ladakh has not been fully resolved just yet. Amidst all of this, amidst the huge amount of buzz and continuing rumors over that book, a magazine has been able to access some of those transcripts or manuscripts and put them out with a certain angle on it, and that's been picked up by Rahul Gandhi now in order to put forward these questions to the government. You've seen Rajnath Singh, the defense minister, the home minister, other ministers all get up and attack Rahul Gandhi back. They've said you're quoting from an unpublished book. Now that may not actually fly with the public because published or unpublished, this was written by a former army chief. But the sum and substance of those allegations is likely to become highly controversial, especially since, one cannot quote from the book because it is unpublished right now. But the sum and substance of what General Naravane is saying and what Rahul Gandhi has picked up is that he did not receive, proper clarity as to what to do about the Chinese now that they were so near. The interesting and ironic aspect of all of this is that General Naravane, when he was the army chief, was the man in charge of making sure that the situation that erupted in eastern Ladakh never actually happened. And I have a feeling that interviews that General Naravane had given back in May 2020, at the time the standoff was burgeoning, suggested that all was well, nothing was out of the ordinary. These were routine movements by the Chinese. No territory had been taken over by the Chinese. And this is exactly what he was advising the government as well. So I think there is a narrative war that has been, been fought between the army chief and the government, a kind of cold war, not very openly, but quite unseemly since that time. And that's the reason why this memoir has now perhaps been weaponized.
Indeed. No, so there are two aspects to it. One is exactly what happened at the time of the standoff. And then second is the politics around it, which is now likely to dominate both the budget session, the legislative agenda being hijacked, and the standoff between the treasury and opposition benches. As someone who understands both aspects of this story so well, at 3 p.m. the House is going to reconvene again. Rahul Gandhi right now has the backing of opposition leaders. Which way do you think this standoff is likely to go, escalate, and probably dominate the entire budget session? Because the Congress party has got an agenda and they're not going to relent on this. That's what it looks like.
Well, Gauri, as a hardcore defense reporter, I'm actually really happy that defense is, the topic of debate and discussion inside Parliament. But, that's on a bit of a lighter note because this is a very, very serious issue. These are operational matters that are being, discussed and debated. Some might say this is a politicization of defense and strategic matters that should be left to the armed forces. I firmly believe that everything should be debated debated and discussed. So it's maybe a good thing that this has come up in Parliament. However, I have a feeling some of these aspects, given that they're being projected in a kind of black and white manner, and conflict and war, as you well know, Gauri, since you cover it, have many, many shades of grey. Some of these things might actually backfire on Rahul Gandhi and the Congress party. Not only the Congress party's own track record as a ruling party when it comes to dealing with the Chinese at the border, but also the actual facts of the Ladakh standoff, are not as black and white as Rahul Gandhi and the Congress party has traditionally tried to project. They've made it seem like huge swaths of territory have been lost, and India cowed down to the Chinese and were brutally defeated in battle after battle. That is simply not true. I have reported firsthand on many of these aspects, and I can tell you for sure that the Indian Army demonstrated incredible bravery, against the Chinese, against many different odds, whether it was Sikkim, whether it was Arunachal, especially in eastern Ladakh, the Galwan clash everyone knows about. So those are, undisputed facts. Where things get a little tricky, perhaps, is where you start talking about individuals now. Because General Naravane, like I said in my first answer, wrote this book quite soon after service, which is very, very unusual, for a general in uniform. These things usually happen many years, maybe a decade after service. But for him to write a book very soon, for it to become controversial, get into this mess of, it can't be published right now because of operational sensitivities, those things have the potential to, in some ways, backfire, I feel, on Rahul Gandhi, since General Naravane himself was the man in the operational hot seat of the army, the man who at that time in May had said, all is well, these are routine movements. He was the army chief who led the big fight back. So
yes,
he did an incredible job, let me add, as far as fending off the Chinese, overseeing an army that, fought back the Chinese in Galwan and elsewhere.
Yes.
But once the politics enters it, it's going to be a minefield.
And Shiv, I'm going to play out exactly that soundbite of General Naravane where he says that not an inch of land has been lost. We play that soundbite of General Naravane, and Shiv, I'm going to come back to you on the big story on the broadcast.
No, I think firstly, we have not lost out on any territory. We are where we were before this whole thing started. But as a result of this agreement, it has been reached on the principle of mutual and equal security. So I think that should be the way we look at this whole disengagement process, that it serves the interests of both countries to have a very stable LAC and with less chances of any confrontation taking place. That should be the larger viewpoint that we take.